Hello, folks. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones. I am one of two lead faculty in the Older Adult Division with my partner in crime, Christina Previtt. We teach modern management of the older adult, Essential Foundations, which is the 8-week online course, Advanced Concepts, which is the online course, as well as MMOA Live, the 2-day course that ultimately all three of those culminate in the CERT MMOA. So right now we have Essential Foundations and Advanced Concepts rocking, two awesome cohorts that are both going. And then we also find ourselves out of the clinic or out of the gym. We are not necessarily able to see people right now. And so I know Christina's in the same boat as I am, that we're working with people through Zoom, through the internet, which has been rather interesting, especially leading group classes with adults 65 and up on Zoom. It's been a lot of fun. Been doing that with Jeff Musgrave with Stronger Life. But I also have a little bit more time on my hands to catch up on some research I've been really wanting to touch on, and I think it's really pertinent to our current situation. So Christina spoke to this last week, but think about many of the older adults that we serve, that many of them are one rep max living, where their capacity is right near or at the demands of daily life. And the sedentary behavior that this social distancing and social isolation really promotes is it can be challenging for a lot of folks. So a lot of function is being lost at the moment, and it's going to be our role to really make people more resilient and increase their capacity when we are able to see them safely. So a very pertinent article to this situation, I think, is the Lift More trial and the subsequent articles that have been published afterwards. I was able to read the new Lift More trial for men that was published a few weeks ago, and I think it's very pertinent to our work right now, but definitely in the near future, especially related to physical function and strength, but also bone mineral density and osteoporosis. So let's dive into this. I want to briefly go over the Lift More trial for those that aren't familiar with it. It was published back in 2017. It was a group down in Australia that was taking women that had at least a negative 1.0 T-score. So that's on the DEXA scan, where they're trying to determine if someone has osteopenia or they have osteoporosis. If they have a T-score of -1 to -2.5, they're osteopenic. If they're beyond that -2.5, then they have osteoporosis. So all of these women, postmenopausal women, had a -1.0 or below. And so there's 49 of them. And what they did is they did an 8-month program. They worked out 2 times a week for 30 minutes. And they did a barbell progression where they were using deadlifts, they were using back squats, they did an overhead press with the barbell operating roughly around 85% of their 1 rep max. So pretty high intensity program. They did a very simple 5x5 program, and they had basically a linear progression to where when someone was able to do 7 reps with pretty good form, they added 5 pounds. And so they also did a very interesting exercise, and that was a jumping chin up. So they had them on the bar, they jumped, tried to get their chin up, but they can kind of control the descent as well, but really focusing on landing in a very jarring manner, to where they wanted to promote the stimulation of bone growth through impact based on the Wolff's Law, which is very interesting. And they let their symptoms kind of guide that. How'd that feel? Was that uncomfortable? Did you have any pain? And let them base the rate of their drop or their impact based on how they were feeling. And they did 5x5 of that as well. They also had a control group that was doing a home-based program. They dosed the program really well. It was at least 60% of a 1 rep max for all the exercises that they did, and they were very basic, nothing different than you'd see in a typical physical therapy home exercise program. But I found the dosage or the intensity rather interesting, because that was likely more intense than many physical therapy sessions. So pretty solid control group. And so they did this for 8 months, and what they're able to show is that the high intensity resistance training improve the bone mineral density, improve their function in terms of their timed up and go, the 5 times sit to stand test, their lower extremity strength, back extensor strength, their vertical jump, functional reach test as well. And they didn't have any injuries. They had one minor complaint that they thought was a muscle strain, and they were able to follow up and show people maintain those benefits over a long period of time. The people that obviously continued to do the program saw the biggest bang for their buck over time, but even the people that completed the Lift More trial over 8 months and then stopped working out, still maintained, had retention effects of their functional gains and the bone mineral density, which was really interesting. So Lift More trial really, I'd say, shook the Jerry PT world in doing these types of interventions with this type of group. And so a new article has been released that basically did the same thing in men. So this is a comparison of bone-targeted exercise strategies to reduce fracture risk in middle-aged and older men with osteopenia and osteoporosis, the Lift More-M trial. So this was interesting because same inclusion criteria, except it was men, had to have at least below that negative 1.0 T-score. They did the Lift More program like they did in the original Lift More trial. They had a control group, which the control group basically continued their daily activities, but they compared those two groups to machine-based isometric axial compression or osteogenic loading. I don't know if you all have heard that term. It's starting to be thrown around a lot more in the Jerry world, but definitely I would say it's becoming more prevalent in the older adult fitness space. I'm pretty familiar with that, just being involved in Stronger Life. I've seen businesses like OsteoStrong, for example, start to pop up in a franchise model. There's a group or a brand called BioDensity that will make these osteogenic loading machines. And they make some pretty wild claims. You literally only need to do 1 repetition of 5 seconds of 4 movements once a week, and you're going to see, significant gains. It's pretty wild claims. The research is not solid. There's only one article based on this randomized controlled trial I'm about to go through. Only one article that really will support that osteogenic loading, but it only had a sample size of 9 people. And so this osteogenic loading, these machines have a lot of marketing behind them, a lot of claims, but not a lot of them are based on actual evidence. And so the Lift More men's trial was trying to see, how does our program compare to the likes of BioDensity, for example, or this osteogenic loading machine. What was very interesting is that the intervention group, the high intensity resistance training group, they did that typical Lift More trial 2 times a week, 30 minutes over 8-month period. But then the BioDensity, the osteogenic loading group, they did twice a week as well. Now, keep in mind, typically the osteogenic loading machines, whenever you see these in practice, it's only 1 time a week. But in the Lift More trial, to keep it consistent with the high intensity resistance training group, they did twice a week. So they did that over an 8-month period. And what they found, or what they measured, was proximal femur and lumbar spine bone mineral density. They measured posture. They also measured the same functional measures as in the Lift More trial, which is timed up and go, 5 times set to stand, back extensor strength, lower extremity strength. They did a functional reach test and the vertical jump as well. And so what they found is that they had a few injuries that were not related to training. So they happened outside of training. They also had a few reports of discomfort and just very minor injuries. There were 3 in the osteogenic loading group, and there were 2 in the high intensity resistance training group. So no major catastrophic injuries that would require someone to be out for the count, which is a typical fear by a lot of physical therapists. Now, the results. This is what was interesting. The high intensity resistance training improved parameters of bone mineral density, functional measures across the board, and muscle strength across the board. These outcomes were very similar to the Lift More trial. The osteogenic loading machines did not improve. The only thing that they showed improvement was in the lumbar spine bone mineral density, and that wasn't even as much of a change as what you saw in the high intensity resistance training group. So the high intensity resistance training group in men and women performed very, very well. And in men, compared to osteogenic loading machines, pretty much blew them out of the water over an 8-month period. And I find that very interesting. So that's kind of the Lift More trial and some of the subsequent articles that have come from that, and the recent trial that was released in men. Now, what are the takeaways? These are the big things that I really walked away with this article. Intensity matters. My goodness. We talk about intensity a lot, and that's something that we preach very common, but we're often talking about intensity relating to actually building strength that results into functional gains, that people are actually going to improve in some of these functional measures that we know correlate to real world application and independence, in their home or community. But intensity matters beyond strength. It matters beyond the muscles, the force output. It really can influence someone's bone mineral density in a very, very significant way. I think about looking at the Liftmore group, the people that did the high intensity resistance training group, the amount of change that they saw in their bone mineral density compared even to the original control group that was exercising at an intensity of 60% of their 1 rep max. Very significant differences between those that were working at 85% of their 1 rep max and 60% of their 1 rep max in the control group. So intensity is huge in many more ways than I think we grasp. Strength, yes, obviously, we've beat that dead horse. But what about bone strength? What about bone mineral density? And we really can have an impact there. I think bone mineral density is something that I think about with my exercise programs to some extent, but I don't really think I can really pull that lever much to make a significant impact. I'm usually thinking about getting more of those muscular changes and improving strength and improving function. However, over an 8-month period, they were able to show pretty significant change. Now, I know we're not seeing people for 8 months. I do acknowledge that, but I just think about, man, if someone can get on that properly dosed program around 85% of their 1 rep max, doing some of these total body functional movements like the deadlift, like the squat, like an overhead press, you can see some pretty crazy changes, and the Liftmore trials have really, really shown that. So I think about intensity. Intensity matters even beyond strength. We can really improve bone mineral density in a pretty potent way. I also think about we don't need to be necessarily afraid of impact. This Liftmore trial did a great way of implementing some impact-based activities where there weren't any adverse events, and people were able to do it, and a lot of them continued to do it, and they actually enjoyed it. And so what can we do to implement that into some of our programs? Because I don't see it a lot in terms of impact-based activities, but those are things that we can definitely sprinkle into our programs. Now keep in mind, they only did the jumping chin-ups twice a week, and they did 5 sets of 5. That is not a lot that we can really get some of our patients to do with even in their home. And so in Stronger Life, myself and Jeff Musgrave, we've been programming some of these activities where we're getting people to jump, intentionally getting people to leave the ground, create some impact through their skeletal system to encourage improvements in bone mineral density. And so you can do a jumping chin up, for example, like they did in the Liftmore trial. You can get a very simple pull-up bar, pull up on that, and then really emphasize that landing. You can even use something like rings. You can use something like TRX straps to allow them to use their upper extremities to get off the ground and to be able to come down. So those are mainly pulling motions. Some people are able to do that. Many, especially if you are working with a more acute population, that can be rather challenging. You may want to encourage upper extremity pushing. So something like the back of a chair, like a countertop. We will use a racked barbell at basically stomach, belly button height for people to be able to push into the bar, elevate their feet, and then be able to come back down and have that impact on the ground. So upper extremity support in terms of pulling, but then also pushing down into that. But also think about getting that upper extremity impact as well. So thinking about something along the lines of plyometric push-ups, for example. It can be rather difficult if you're in a horizontal position, but you can gradually increase that angle to where they're doing those plyometric-based push-ups to get that impact through the upper extremities as well, to try and promote a change in their bone mineral density. The other thing I think about is the importance of the symptom behavior model. They're trying to really dial in dosage here with the Liftmore trials, whether women or men, but what rep scheme, what set scheme works with these folks, what intensity, what types of exercise. They're trying to really see what is the optimal prescription for these folks. But the beautiful thing is that a lot of it is driven on intensity of trying to measure it, but also using RPE, but then also the symptom behavior model of talking to people. How does that feel? Was that uncomfortable? Did that feel okay? Did you have pain? But letting people's symptoms guide your dosage of exercise. And I think that's important with every exercise that we do, but definitely with these impact-based activities. What I've seen with the folks that I've implemented this with is that it can flare up, if they have an irritable knee, for example, from osteoarthritis, for example. I've had several people that we've started off probably a little too intense, where we've tried to do some type of supported hopping and said, no, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel good. That's flaring my knees up a little bit. Try and scale it down a little bit more. Try and provide a little bit more upper extremity support. Maybe not emphasize that landing as much, and they're able to tolerate it. So make it be a conversation. Leverage that symptom behavior model. Really ask some good questions to get an idea of how they're responding to that particular scale of that impact activity, and then you can change the scaling options to allow it to be a more pleasurable experience in the sense of not having as much pain or discomfort. So that's something to think about. Big takeaways for me and the people I'm working with: intensity matters beyond strength. Big differences between that control group in the original Lift More trial doing 60% of their 1 rep max and the folks doing the barbell lifts with the jumping chin-ups at 85% of their 1 rep max. Big differences in bone mineral density. We really got to dial that in if we want to see some of those changes as well with our patients. Don't be afraid of impact. We can get people to load up their skeleton in many different ways. We can leverage upper extremity support, whether you're pulling or whether you're pushing on something, to get some hopping. Let symptoms guide the scaling options that you are providing. If it feels good, then keep on doing it. We want to really have that conversation with folks. We also want to think about upper extremity impact activities as well, like plyometric push-ups, for example, will typically be done against a countertop or a wall of some sort. So that's all I've got for y'all. I will put links to all these studies in the description, so you all can look at them and give them a read if you want. The original Lift More trial and then the Lift More trial for men that was recently published, really good reads. I encourage you all to check that out. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, hit it up on the Facebook post. Otherwise, I appreciate y'all. Stay safe. Continue that social distancing. Remember that you can be an asymptomatic carrier of COVID-19. It takes 14 days as a 14-day incubation period. It can survive on surfaces for a few days. So don't think you're immune to this. And even if you don't feel anything, you may be carrying it and you can give it to someone else. That's the big thing with this very contagious disease. The lag period, the incubation period is a big issue, but also the lack of testing as it stands during this recording is a big issue. So y'all have heard plenty of this before, but just want to encourage y'all to be smart about this and treat it seriously, but also load your patients as well. Treat that seriously too. Y'all have a good one. See ya.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.